Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today is Jan Ford. Jan Ford is the author of a new book called Dancing with Unity, and you can find out more about Jan Ford and her wonderful work at her website, jan-ford.com. Welcome, Jan Ford.
Welcome, Catherine. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm just so pleased to be with a fellow author and primary person that's really promoting wellness and healing in our world, for we are definitely here to change the world. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
So Jan Ford, here at the Natural Healing Show, we've had a number of experts talk about racism. We've talked about how racism affects a person's health because it affects all levels of a being. We've talked about how racism affects a person's self-confidence. In your professional opinion, as the author of Dancing with Unity, what exactly is racism?
Racism stems from 1900s and the 1800s, where people were basically trying to divide us. So historically, it was used primarily almost as a weapon. And it's anyone who does not treat a person of another race equally. So in that definition, we're seeing the words discrimination, bias. Some of these other words do creep up into the basic definition of racism.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, my understanding is that at the DNA level, there's no difference at the DNA level from a Black person, from a yellow person, from a white person. At the DNA level, we're all human beings.
Yes, I agree with that. I taught a workshop at the 92nd Street Y where I started out with lemons to illustrate that. Where if you look at the outside of a lemon, you might see some blemishes, but once you take the peel of that lemon off, they all look the same. So if we were to peel back our skin, we have the same DNA, we have the same organ systems. We basically are the same underneath our skin.
For sure. And, you know, nowadays with sites like Ancestry, I think it's ancestry.com, you can trace your DNA. And if I trace my DNA, I'd have Black people, I'd have Indians, I'd have people from all over the world who were my ancestors. And
Yes.
it's all in us.
And that's why it's so important for us to love each other, because we are mixed. There are no pure races anymore. We've been so highly traveled. And when I look into my DNA, I have Native American. My grandfather was from St. Thomas, but his first language was Dutch. So obviously those islands were colonized and people have definitely mixed throughout the ages.
So in your professional opinion, as the author of Dancing with Unity, how can understanding that at the DNA level, we're all humans, how can that, understanding that scientific fact, help us shift our attitude about racism?
Well, as you stated earlier, when we are at odds with each other, anytime we have fear or flight, our cortisol levels rise, and that leads to a lot of health issues. As Dr. Larry Sherman stated, I quote him in my book because he says it's a national health problem because both parties now are experiencing a high cortisol level, which leads to everything you can think of. It lowers the immune system and therefore leads to a lot of different types of illnesses. So I totally feel that we need to move away from this old paradigm. This is something, again, started 1900s, 1800s, and it's not our responsibility to carry these burdens anymore. You know, I'm having a connection with you right now, Catherine, that's beautiful. And that's why I talk about unity moments in my book, because these are the things that bridge the gap. These are the things where we can cross over into new understandings and learn about each other and appreciate the world in its diversity.
Now, where, in your professional opinion, Jan Ford, where does racism originate in a person's upbringing or psychology?
Many people, as we know, have responded to their history. In other words, my mother made great apple pie. So those recipes were passed down to me. And often in many households, people get an aversion to something and they don't always understand why or where this came from. I had neighbors that were afraid of dogs. The mother was afraid of dogs, so therefore the children were afraid of dogs. So a lot of these ideas are passed down from generation to generation. And a lot of it comes from ignorance or lack of contact. Familiarity is also at the core of how some of these things have been perpetuated.
Now, in my work as a medical intuitive healer, there's something called a spiritual clock. And it kind of goes to what we're talking about, because when you're first born as a child, your parents could say, the sky is purple. And as a child, you just go, okay. And, you know, we are imprinted and programmed with these beliefs from our parents, who got them from their parents, who got them from their parents, and so on. And it's only as we mature as adults, we can look up in the sky and go, I'm not sure about that. I'm seeing things differently. So again, in this spiritual clock, we basically accept our original programming because it all happens before we're consciously aware. Most of our childhood programming happens before we're even 5 years old. And we just unconsciously accept the beliefs and thoughts of the family that and culture that we grew up in. Black
Absolutely.
people are a certain way, white people are a certain way, yellow people are a certain way. And again, as we get older, then we can start to question that. And it's also my experience on this spiritual clock, working with clients, that sometimes we have to have really a chaotic or upsetting life event before we stop and we go, wait a minute, is everything that I've been taught, is it true? Is it working for me? Is it working for our society? How can I do this better? And it's only kind of when there's some sort of, again, it could be a health event where you get sick. It could be a societal event, such as when the police officers murdered George Floyd. That was a pivotal moment for many people all over the world. So what, in your opinion, Jan Ford, as the author of Dancing with Unity, what are some kinds of events that force people to question their own views about race?
Well, I think you highlighted some of the major events, you know, as we talked about George Floyd and experienced that. It was a global awareness. I mean, we had people protesting in Europe. We also had people that were in a lot of situations individually from their forefathers. I know my parents talked to me about many different situations that have highlighted it. You know, the March on Washington was something that was a high point for my parents. And because we had the, I want to call the freedom fighters and they highlighted the freedom fighters primarily because they were all races that held hands together for freedom for all. So many African Americans back in the 50s and 60s were looking for global freedom. They wanted to be included. They wanted to assimilate into society, raise their children, and live a productive, beautiful life. So the March on Washington was very important back in those days.
Right. And the March on Washington, for our audience, this was when Martin Luther King led a group of people to Washington, and he gave his very famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yes.
If you haven't listened to it, it's just, even to this day, it brings chills to me. Very heart opening and very eye opening, where he said, "I have a dream that one day, we'll all live together." Now, how can a person tell whether or not they are racist? Are we all racist?
Well, that's a very important question to ask ourselves. Originally, I think the term racism, as I've started to do more research on it, changes and evolves as we go on. Some people talk about systemic racism. Many African Americans feel they're not racist because they don't control jobs and housing, and redlining has occurred, and some of these different historical things. But I believe that everybody who mistreats anyone in any racial way is experiencing some type of racism. We need to look at the cause, and we also need to look at the reaction. And in a biblical sense, we look at law versus grace, and sometimes with grace, we have to allow things like affirmative action when people feel disenfranchised to catch up with the rest of the society and be given certain opportunities. So it's a very, very good question. And in my workbook, which is the companion to Dancing with Unity, I take the reader through that journey where they can look at a room and see where they see themselves in the room. And sometimes these things are very personal. Sometimes families have gone through some very horrific, horrible things. We kind of can think about even the Jews in Nazi Germany. When I traveled to Europe, I had Jewish friends that had a very hard time going to Nuremberg because of that horrible, history of Hitler. So the workbook gives you an opportunity to see where you're at. And then I give you tasks and things to do to move you out of that into embracing other people that might not look like you. So I love the fact that I've been able to write this book from, God's point of view, stating some scriptures and things that are biblical, to also move people in the direction of how God would see this. He says in the Psalms that it's very pleasing to God to know that we work in unity, for brothers and sisters to work in unity, but also to love our neighbors as we would ourselves. It's a very important principle that even if the person doesn't look like you, we can get to know them. And from that knowing, we can get to love them. And making those discoveries is so important.
So Jan Ford, author of Dancing with Unity, in your opinion, is racism a form of judgment? Because judgment could be, I'm better than you, or I'm not as good as you.
Yeah, I think that was the reason why it was used as such a weapon, to make people feel that they were either inferior or superior. And moving out of that paradigm is incredible to me, because we have inventors. We just look at the inventors. I taught science for many, many years, and I always had the class during Black History Month, look at all the contributions, so that if I had children, they would know the contributions of everyone. You know, we look at world inventions, world art, world sports, any one of these areas, we can see the contributions of everybody.
Now, what is white privilege?
White privilege has been one of those terms that has come up recently as people start to see that there has been some systematic things in place, not by the good people of the United States, laws that were put into place to keep some groups ahead of other groups. You know, if we talk about the Irish and the Italians coming to the New World, they were often put in subservient positions. And there was racism then toward them because the general population wanted to keep their jobs. And that has always, economics has always been an issue. So that people felt, oh, I'm better than you because I have this job. So in that, looking at that history, there were certain privileges that were allowed by white Americans that weren't often allowed by African Americans. So it's a term that we can look at, but it's also a term now that we can say, let's look at equality. Let's move toward saying we're equal. You know, we're equal in so many ways. We have so many things that we have in common, more things in common than we have outside of being, you know, outside of us not sharing some of those commonalities.
So with this sage advice, we are now going to take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors. Hang in there and we'll be right back. So Jan Ford, can people of all races be racist?
I think they can, but I think we also need to know why they're being a racist. Some people have had the experience of not coming in contact with African Americans or people from other cultures, and they don't know how to respond, or things have been passed down, like you said earlier. I'm happy that a lot of our youth is moving away from a lot of that because they're coming in contact with popular culture, they're coming in contact with people from around the world at their universities and colleges. And it's a beautiful thing to know that the young people are discarding a lot of these old beliefs. And then you have African Americans who feel that they have been discriminated against, they haven't gotten their fair share of the American pie, so to speak, and they are reacting to that because they want to be a part of this. And so you have two different things happening with this, you know, can we be racist or non-racist? It's kind of a yes and no at times. And people are looking at the power of racism, you know, again, redlining, you know, our criminal justice system where you had businesses profiting from people being in prison. You know, we've had drugs dumped into neighborhoods. And so we really need to look at the history and then ask that question, why are we a racist?
So here we are at the Natural Healing Show. So, and we can look at racism from two perspectives. One is the perspective of someone who has been, we'll call it, subjected to racism. This could be, for example, an Arab woman, okay, or an Indian man, or again, a Native American, or a Black person. And then also we can look at it from the point of view of the people who are projecting their views, their judgment onto others. What do you feel are the effects of racism from a wellness standpoint?
the effects of racism, as stated again by Dr. Larry Sherman, highlight that we as a society have allowed racism to enter into our biological makeup. When we see someone that doesn't look like us, and they took a study of boys and girls, and there's other studies that we recognize familiarity as early as age 3. So anything that doesn't look like us sends sort of a message to the brain, different parts of the brain, that triggers this level of cortisol. So we now recognize that if we become more familiar with people, if we see them on the playground, if we see the crossing guard, if we go into a grocery store and we come in contact with someone on a regular basis, we now pull down those walls that can disrupt the signals in our brain and make us more comfortable and feel that, you know, this person is a nice person. I want to get to know this person. And that's why in my book, I talk about the unity moments. I've had many encounters with people in the bank, the post office. I strike up a conversation. With social media, sometimes it's a little harder for people to have that one-on-one contact. But biologically speaking, we don't want to have diabetes, heart problems, you know, all sorts of immune deficiencies, which we're seeing, and they become more prevalent. We also see depression, psychological dispositions that are not healthy, that trigger other biological responses. So we want to get away from that. We want to know what are some of the things we can do to improve our health. And having a calm disposition, taking the time, even when we go for a walk in the park, that is all building our immune system, raising our frequency, and helping us to be healthy, productive individuals in our society.
Now, I am here in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where I live and work. And I live in the home of Martin Luther King, who of course has left us decades ago. And the city of Atlanta has gone through a number of discussions recently where they're talking about possibly breaking up and into basically boiling it down into the white area and the black area. And at the moment, the forces of unity are prevailing at the moment. We have a new mayor who's done a really good job, Andre Dickens, who's done a really good job. But my question to you is about fear. Because I'll take myself, for example. I'm 5'3". I'm a little white lady, and I'm about to be 63. So I'm a little old white lady. So if I'm walking down the street, I don't instill fear in anybody. Nobody's like, oh my God, is Catherine Carrigan gonna, this person who I don't know, this little old white lady, is she gonna pull a gun on me? Is she gonna try and sell me drugs? There's nothing scary about the way I look that would threaten anybody of any race, I don't think. Maybe I'm miscalculating. But in your opinion, Jan Ford, how is fear a root aspect of racism?
You know, fear has been used in so many ways in our society to get people to do things that they don't always want to do. You know, fear mongering is an old method, and it destroys communities. You know, put in the most simplest terms, it is something, when you have a fear of something, you're not getting to know something. And I've seen people react to things and it's in their past, really. You know, we don't know what trauma people have gone through. Somebody reminds somebody of something, or situation, and they lash out at that person who really is not at the core of their hurt, you know. So fear is very detrimental. And I think, again, when we become more familiar with each other, when we start to give voice to one another, when we start to understand how we feel. One of the things that they did in South Africa that I thought was so important after apartheid was they actually had these hearings where people got a chance to say, please forgive me, or forgive my ancestors. Thank you for acknowledging that. I think once we acknowledge our fear, we can overcome our fear and also come face to face with what are those things we're fearful of. Because a lot of times we have a misunderstanding of really what that's all about.
Great answer. Now, Jan Ford, if I recognize, okay, I'm racist and I have racist views, and that's affecting me and it's affecting my society, and maybe it's affecting my family or my interactions with other people, how can I, as an individual, combat racism within myself?
I think the very first step, which I highlight in my book, are those unity moments. Take the time to know the people in your community. Go outside your comfort zone. Now, I'm not saying put yourself in harm's way and just talk to any old stranger on the street, but one of the things that I love is I go to Faith Exchange down in Wall Street in New York, and it's an international community. And I love going to church there because it's so international, people from all over the world, different cultures, and I get to mingle and hang out with them in a very safe, controlled environment. And, you know, going to lectures, even on my website, I have workshops and I have a beautiful workbook that can lead people on this journey and do it in a, what I call a more holistic way of getting to know where they're at and moving themselves forward. And it starts with us. It doesn't start with our politicians, you know, it doesn't start with, you know, the laws, even though we would like to see laws of equality. It really starts one-on-one. You know, just me talking to you, Catherine, today has been such a breath of fresh air because I feel we're of like minds. I would love to travel with you and get to know you even more, you know, and come down to Atlanta and see what Atlanta has to offer and invite you into my house in New York so we could go shopping. You look like you have a beautiful wardrobe. Anyway, and you don't look 63. So I already see that we have a lot in common, and we're having a unity moment right now because we see eye to eye and we're understanding each other. And that's the very first step to take.
What a beautiful piece of advice. And on that note, let's take another break to listen to one of our commercial sponsors. Now, Jan Ford, you and I are both women. And when I was growing up, my professor from Brown told me, he said, as a woman, you have to be 10 times better than the men. And again, I'm a little woman. I don't have a deep authoritative voice, you know. And I listened to him, and that's actually been my experience as a professional. It was like, okay, I've published 10 books. I'm the, host of this wonderful radio show, which is a great privilege to be able to talk to people like you. But so my question to you is, how is racism similar to or different from sexism?
Oh, great question. I mean, I think they are similar in some ways in that you're discriminating against someone based on not their capabilities or character, but you're discriminating solely on either the fact that they're a man or a woman, or the fact that they're Black or white. And so even Black women have had the double-edged sword. You know, they go into these meetings and they're the only one. And I think that men have also turned a corner. I mean, we have certain situations in the news that we see, you know, are coming to light. But I'm happy to say that some of these issues need to be resolved. Not some, all of them. You know, you can't be in the workplace and have people abuse you in any way. So they are similar in that respect. We go back to what, the 1920s and 30s, when women were given the right to vote. And so that was a landmark event for many women, and brought them into the workforce. But we still have women. I believe I read an article maybe a year or so ago of a woman conductor that was not getting the same pay as her male counterpart. And we see this happening in job situations. So equality is very important. We want to be able to see that people have equity based on their skills and their talents, and not be discriminated against because they're male or female or Black or white, or even another culture, you know, like we've seen Muslim people ostracized. And, you know, right now with the issue with Ukraine and Russia, you know, we're seeing some of that. And it's really, again, not the good people of the world that we're fighting against. You know, the Bible is clear. We wrestle with flesh and blood and principalities in high places. So we're all striving to do the best we can to raise our families and live on this planet. And we have to recognize that and try to do our part, especially as an employer or someone who is giving people jobs.
So I had to share this story, and it's going to lead to my next question. So I went to Brown University, and one of the years that I was there, you know, we have dorm rooms. Well, there were two Black ladies from Washington, D.C. who lived in the room next to me. Well, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, okay? And long story, they didn't get to know me. They heard about where I was from. They heard about my family owns a rice plantation, okay? Now, there's never been any slaves on this farm in my generation, but these two ladies heard about where I was from, and they would literally follow behind me and spit on me.
Oh.
Okay, projectile spit. Now that was just one instance. Okay, but it helped me to really understand how unpleasant racism can be. And yet I'm sure somebody listening would be like, listen to me, listen, sister, that's nothing. Let me share with you what I've been through. So Jan Ford, in your professional opinion, if someone is subject to racism, whether they're being spit on, which is basically a form of physical abuse, and emotional abuse and spiritual abuse, what are some tips for helping a person survive, get through, and overcome the insults because of a racial situation?
That is such a good question. And I have wrestled, we've all wrestled with insults, whether it's racist or not. You know, even members of our family that might have a disagreement or whatever. And my pastor, Dan Stratton, really helped me understand, again, going from God's point of view, that we should turn the other cheek and love them anyway. And even, you know, feeling depressed, you're allowed to have your emotions. You're allowed to have, get angry. I'm sure that, by these women spitting on you, it was a horrible situation. And, I feel bad. I wish there was something I could do about it. But once again, when communication breaks down, abnormality sets in. So if they would have come to you and said, listen, what was that plantation about? And how do you feel about it? And got some of your history, you could have had this bridge and come together as friends. My daughter went to school in Virginia, Hampton, and it's all Black, but yet the Northern Blacks the Southern Blacks didn't like the Northern Blacks. So she ended up going to Temple because it was a more international school, because she couldn't even get along within her own race. So we have a lot to really overcome. And I think one of the key things is, first of all, communication. Second of all, pray on it and ask for the healing to take place, because these things are you don't want to hold on to any hurt and be carrying it with you for the rest of your life. God says, cast your cares on me, for I care for you. So we want to be able to lift these burdens, communicate, and also get some healing, whether it's counseling, walking through the park, going for doing a meditation. I've done a lot of meditations on removing the burdens, putting myself in a quiet space, hearing from the divine, and moving myself out of this turmoil and confusion that might have surrounded me. And do the things that you enjoy. I like going to the sauna. I love riding my bicycle. I love going through the woods and seeing the rabbits and the turtles and the ducks. I call them all my friends. And riding around that pond, being around water is very healing. Looking up all those healing things that you can do, drinking plenty of water, grounding yourself. There's a lot of wonderful things that you can do to really alleviate a lot of tension and stress from horrific situations.
Yeah. And I'm going to make a comment. At the time that happened to me, I was very young. I think I was like 18 or something like that. And it was just a surprise. No one had ever spit on me before for any reason. And it was only by asking around, like I couldn't figure out why somebody's spitting on me. I didn't understand. And it was like, well, they heard that, they heard something about me and they made an assumption. And at the time, I remember being really frightened. I mean, maybe if I was courageous, I would have gone to them and said, hey, let's sit down. Why don't you get to know me and find out what I'm really like?
Right.
But it was just, but I want to talk about abuse, because also here at the Natural Healing Show, we've had many experts talk about abuse in all kinds of forms. And if you're listening to this broadcast and you recognize that you are, in fact, currently a victim of racism, then it's very important, in my view, as a medical intuitive healer, that you ask yourself whether you're being abused. Are you being verbally abused? And this could be verbal abuse at your job. Are you being emotionally abused? Are you being financially abused? And there's many ways we can be abused. And I want to say this for everyone who's listening. If you recognize that you're a victim of racism and that you're being abused, the most important thing, in my professional opinion, is that you remove yourself from that situation.
Absolutely.
So I can remember years ago being at a conference for stress, and there was an expert on stress who was speaking, and he was speaking to a room full of medical doctors and natural healers. And he said, okay, you've got a woman and she's being beaten by her husband. You have two choices. You can remove her from the situation, or you can give her a bunch of drugs and supplements. What do you think will be most effective? And the answer is really obvious, but we don't think about that. So if you realize that you are being abused because of racism, then you want to take steps to remove yourself. That could be get another job where people are respectful of you as a human being and who show you dignity. It could be to put yourself in a community where you will feel safe, where you'll feel respected. What are your comments about racism and abuse?
I love what you said, because I heard a pastor recently say the same thing. If you're being abused, get out. Number one, go to the authorities, call the police, don't even hesitate, get out of that house or remove the person out of the house. The police will come and remove that person. We are not put on this planet to be abused in any way. And just if you forgive someone, it doesn't mean you take abuse. That's another thing. What I do feel is that once you have removed yourself from that situation, you need to get help. You need to have some kind of counseling or someone that you're going to go to that's a professional that can talk to you about the steps you need to take now to transition either into another lifestyle or to set up some support around you so that you can move yourself into a better mindset and a better situation. It's very important that we heal, and it's very important that we don't continue to harbor those feelings of rejection and abuse, and even sometimes it's physical. Physical abuse is is worse, because you have to heal from whatever that is. And mental abuse is also just as detrimental, because now your body has biological things that are going on. You could have heart problems and have severe mental anxiety.
And of course, many people, if you work for a large corporation, you could go to the HR, the human resources department, and talk to them about what you've experienced, because it's illegal.
Legal. And to get the lawyers involved, you really need to, I tell my daughter this all the time, that, sometimes you don't want to call the authorities. When you do, it's documented. Documentation is important. You don't want the police to show up and you say, oh, this has been going on for 10 years, but there's no documentation. So a lawyer or a judge can't help you because you haven't taken the proper steps to take yourself into the court system, which will help you.
Yeah. And so, Jan Ford, final question, really important question. So someone listening to our broadcast who says, wow, I can remember, and it could be this week, it could be this month, it could be this year or in years ago. If someone listening to this broadcast recognizes that they've been a victim of abuse as a result of racism, whether again, it was verbal abuse, you were called a name, physical abuse, or discrimination that limited your income, what steps should people take to heal from racist experiences that they've had in their past?
Once again, going to a counsel or being counseled by a psychologist, someone who can really take you into your past, look at the certain issues that you have. Some people have abandonment issues. Some people have issues that stem from a physical abuse. Some people have issues because their loved ones have passed away. We're looking at that quite a bit right now with people who have died from certain illnesses. So a lot of people are lashing out and turning their hurt into another type of abuse. They say that a lot of people who are abused in the past take that out on their loved ones. So abuse is something that we really need to control. And there are many psychologists, there are agencies, there's hotlines that you can call. Many churches have groups that they form to give you the support that you need, so that people that have professional experience can give you all the tips, ideas, and even eating properly. You know, sometimes food can be a way of people moving themselves into a healthy body, so that their thoughts are also elevated. You know, I use essential oils. I love to do fasting. I live a very clean and healthy lifestyle, which has helped my total disposition. Prayer, meditation, going for walks, and doing those things that really elevate your frequency and bring you into a light-filled life of fulfillment, is what I'm trying to say, fulfilling your life and bringing light into a dark situation. We want to be able to do that all the time and be around people who are positive. So important to build your support group. I mean, I lost many members of my family, but I have such a beautiful support group that I know people are not just tolerating me, they are loving me, and they are there to support me. Support is so important to get in life. So delve into if you're going to look at your internet, look at agencies and support groups and psychologists and social workers and people who have answers for you. And together we will all change the world, because we'll be living in a much beautiful environment that we're sending light to each other. Like Catherine and I are sending light to each other right now.
Beautiful message. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Meanwhile, our wonderful guest, Jan Ford, who's been talking with us about how to heal from racism. You can read her new book, Dancing with Unity, and find out more about her wonderful work at her website, jan-ford.com. And remember, racism is a real thing. It can affect your mind, body, and spirit. And if you recognize that you have been affected by racism, please give yourself permission to find the resources necessary to heal from racism. As you do this, you'll begin to heal yourself on all levels. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.